I grew up the son of a writer. He was a novelist, then a historian. And I remember at the bottom of the manuscripts that he typed out and submitted on paper to publishers was always this mysterious symbol, this little C with a circle around it. I remember asking him, "What is that?" And he told me that it was copyright. It signified this magical power that he had protecting him against having his work stolen by other people. And I grew up sort of thinking about that a lot as one of the sort of cool things about living in the United States. And I didn't really realize how cool until I went to lunch one day with a friend of mine years ago when I was a magazine editor. And he told me the story of having written a script and submitting it to a famous actor's production company, and then watching that actor go ahead and make the movie without giving him any credit or involving him or certainly paying him in any way. And I was very cynical at the time. I was I was in a kind of beaten down part of my career. And I remember thinking, man, you must have gotten screwed, huh? And he laughed and he said, nope. He said he had registered it with the Writers Guild, which gave him copyright. And then he had an attorney send a demand letter to the company and he got a big settlement. And he said, that's how I bought our apartment. I raised 2 kids there thanks to this. Copyright in the United States is a big deal. It's constitutionally enshrined. We, in our Constitution, talk about the need to facilitate the progress of science and the useful arts by basically giving exclusive ownership over a work to a creator, an author, a musician, a painter, whatever it is. But at the same time, we don't give them the right to control the idea. We give them the right to have ownership over the expression of the idea. And that balance is a really important thing because it means you can't just say, I own the idea for the internet or for flowers on a canvas. Instead, what you own is your execution of that idea. And that is how we have, in part, been such an incredibly creative country, is because we both protect creators' rights, but don't make it such that you can lock up creativity for all time. Why am I telling you all this? Well, because right now the Trump administration seems to be getting ready to do away with a bunch of the copyright protections that people like my dad and my friend and millions of artists and creative people have enjoyed all this time, in order to hand the big AI companies the right to basically just use those copyrighted works. Over this past weekend, Sherry Perlmutter, who is the head of the Copyright Office in the United States, learned by email on a Saturday that she had been fired. And this, I don't think, is a coincidence. And most of the observers that I've been speaking to say it is probably not a coincidence that she got fired right after releasing the third part of a big report on AI that basically said that the Copyright Office was beginning to think that more and more AI might be in violation of copyright, or at the very least might owe creative people some consideration of the exclusive rights they have under copyright before these companies feed this stuff into training their AI systems. Now, I have a piece up at theripcurrent.com about this whole thing. And if you look back several months, you can also see one called The Exact Moment We Gave It All to AI. And this is a moment, a historical moment that I think about a lot. Because back in the late 2000s and early 2010s, there was a big fight brewing over Google Books, which at that time had basically, sort of begun, without anyone's permission, just scanning in copyrighted books. And what they argued when they were finally sued by 2 different big authors groups about it was, we are in fact transforming this work, these pieces of literature, these pieces of nonfiction, these history books, into a whole different thing. What we're making is an academic resource that people can use to study up on something. And as a result, they fell under what in copyright law is known as fair use. If something is transformative, if it turns what was a product of the market into an entirely new interpretation of that product, one that doesn't seek to replace the old one, but is a new version of it with new value, that's considered fair game. That's fair use. And Google Books went on and on fighting about this in court. And there was a brief moment when a judge almost said to them, you know what, I don't know that this is fair use. I think you may actually owe these authors something. But then everything went sideways. The judge basically changed his mind, and we wound up in this world in which huge amounts of books, millions and millions of books are scanned in every year. And now AI makers are more and more feeling entitled to go ahead and scan those kinds of things in. The Trump administration has been hearing, in fact, recently from OpenAI, Google, and others that they should just be allowed to just run roughshod over copyright law entirely and just feed copyrighted works into training their AI systems in order to keep up with China. And I would bet that number one in Trump's ear about this is Elon Musk. Last month in April, he responded to a post on X by Jack Dorsey, the original founder of Twitter, who said, "Delete all IP laws." And Elon Musk said, "I agree." These are guys who have been arguing for a long time that because they want to be able to feed as much as they can into these AI systems to make them better and better at what they do, they shouldn't have to obey intellectual property laws or copyright laws. They should just run right through them. And OpenAI and Google have both submitted big policy proposals to the Trump administration saying this is what the rules should be. In the interest of giving us the shot at being technologically superior to China, you should allow us to just, run steamroller right over this kind of stuff. But here's why this is such an important thing with the Copyright Office. The Copyright Office released this report in which they said, actually, we're not so sure that this kind of fair use argument holds water anymore. So, once upon a time, right, they argued, academic use of AI to rapidly read and synthesize copyrighted works the way that Google Books does, maybe that's okay, right? That could be fine. But they said, to create new interoperable works using images or sound recordings to train a model that generates similar expressive outputs doesn't merely remove a technical barrier to productive competition. Stay with me here. In such cases, unless the original work itself is being targeted for comment or parody, it is hard to see the use as transformative. Basically, what they're saying is, if you pull in the copyrighted works of a famous author, let's say J.K. Rowling, right, to train an AI model to write stuff that sounds like J.K. Rowling, so much so that you can, in fact, tell an AI model, and you can right now, hey, write me an imaginary book in the voice of J.K. Rowling. They're saying that's not a remix. That's not transformative. That is you seeking to replace an original work in the marketplace with a cheap knockoff, right? That is, them, and this is the Copyright Office not specifically saying you should lose in court over that, but it comes as close to saying that as it ever has. Now, I'd like to just sort of point out here, right, that the United States in a lot of ways has depended on fair use and on this sort of loose interpretation of owning the expression of an idea as opposed to the idea itself in some really amazing ways, right? We, for instance, we invented remix culture, right? The whole idea that you can have a song by Barry White that then gets remixed, sampled up and turned into a whole other song by Mary J. Blige. That's an amazing thing. That's one of the things that makes the country so fascinating, right? And every time that somebody on Saturday Night Live impersonates a famous person, or there's a famous, a funny bumper sticker that riffs on something you already know. Comment, parody, this kind of thing is enshrined in not just our Constitution, but I think our whole sort of creative cultural character. That is a good thing. But what the Copyright Office is basically arguing here is we may be leaving that behind. And it's not just the Copyright Office making this argument. There was a really interesting meeting or an appearance by a guy named Matthew Prince from Cloudflare. Cloudflare Services is basically a sort of like a plumbing provider to big websites. It creates the way in which they connect to the internet in all these different ways. And he made this really interesting point on stage recently in which he said, once upon a time, the trade-off with someone like Google made good business sense for creators because back then, Google, Google has inserted itself in between us and the journalism or photography or art or video that we want, but it had the courtesy of sending people back to the original source every so often. At one time, the estimate, this is according to Matthew Prince, was for every 2 pages of a website that Google scraped, they would send you 1 visitor. So scrape 2 pages, get 1 visitor. That was the trade. Then he points out that has changed. Today, he says that trade-off with a typical Google search is actually 6 to 1, 6 pages to 1 visitor. So now he also points out for OpenAI, that ratio is 250 pages to 1. 250 pages absorbed before you get anybody back. And for Anthropic, one of the other big foundational model makers, he says that ratio is 6,000 pages to 1. This is, of course, what you've seen already. If you look on Google these days and search for a piece of factual information, it is much more likely to just summarize the information for you at the top of the search results than actually point you at a website. The likelihood that you're going to leave Google to go figure out what's going on, and get a qualified source, that is falling and falling, the likelihood of that. We're living increasingly in a world where the answers to the questions that you ask online are not going to lead you to the original source. They're going to lead you to a derivative of that source, a copy of it, a new AI interpretation. And so more and more, this is what Prince and many of the people I've been speaking to have said, is that when you want a piece of art, you're just going to ask AI to make it for you. You're not going to go to a creator. You're not going to go to a movie director. You're not going to go to a musician or a journalist. You're just going to go and take whatever the AI gives you. And, this is the thing about President Trump firing Shira Perlmutter, is that she was the top regulator of copyright and seems to have been leaning toward the idea that these AI companies might actually owe the creators a little consideration. They may not be allowed to just take whatever they want from them. And he doesn't seem to have really liked that idea, and that may very well be why she was fired. So, for years, I've really tried to warn people in my world that journalists really, are under threat of being cut out of this entirely. If you have a neutral-looking expertise kind of site that's just giving you answers, why would you figure you need a journalist to try and tell you anything? Why would you be, spending extra time going and looking for qualified sources or a media write-up? So with the firing of the nation's top copyright regulator, I think that same threat is now facing creators of all kinds. For me, when I look at this, and I'm talking to you here, if you want to be a creator, right? You want to do that for a living? You want to make movies? You want to make art? Until now, our system was such that there was at least the possibility of making it such that you could do those things and pay your rent. If we're going to live in a world in which it's truly not going to be rewarded when you do a creative thing and instead just get sucked up, I worry that could really be the end of American creativity, the end of this cultural powerhouse that we have been. And instead, we'll start remixing the past just endlessly until we're listening to basically the stale old music, the same tune over and over again.
Thanks everyone for watching. Your support means the world to us. So make sure you hit the like button and you subscribe to our channel to make sure that you never ever miss a video. We're live every day, 10 a.m. Eastern time. We drop even more content at 2 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Eastern. And if you want more Don Lemon Show content, we'd love for you to become a member of the Lemon community, where you will receive access to special community posts. You'll get exclusive content and members-only live shows. So head over to our channel page or click the join button on this video. Again, thank you for watching. We appreciate your love and your support, and we will see you next time.